VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And friends, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk. And just before we get to our guest and topic for today, today does mark the end of the term for the United States Supreme Court. And as happens every year, some very impacting decisions given in the last final days, and this term has been no exception for that. A couple of remarkable rulings here today. First of all, the news coming out in regard to birthright citizenship. I'm looking at Newsmax.com right now. Supreme Court today upheld a broad conception of birthright citizenship, rejecting President Trump's executive order declaring that children born to people who are in the U.S. illegally or temporarily are not American citizens. The Supreme Court disagreed with that. The commander-in-chief did not express panic, as he said on Truth Social, though. The Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, which is too bad for our country, but we can easily make it up in Congress through through legislation with the support of the president. That's been determined through this process. He said Congress should start today to work on ending expensive and unfair to our country birthright citizenship. They have my complete and total support. Congressman Chip Roy told the Daily Signal the Supreme Court failed the American people. But somebody is just jumping up and down regarding this and applauding the Supreme Court, and that's the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. They have come out in full support of this decision and applauding that from the court itself. A second decision that also came out today, and I'm looking at a release from Liberty Counsel right now, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled today that states and schools can protect women and girls by restricting biological males from female sports teams. It was a multifaceted ruling. The court held 9-0 that banning gender-confused males from female sports does not violate Title IX, while the justices then ruled 6-3 that the ban does not violate the Equal Protection Clause. Now, this rationale now gives 27 states with similar laws protecting women and girls in sports solid legal footing. A quick statement from Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel. He said this is an exceptional decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. Biological reality dictates that men and women are different. These laws acknowledge reality, so female athletes are not competitively, physically and emotionally harmed by gender-confused males in their sports and private spaces. Title IX's purpose is to provide more opportunities to women and girls. Keeping biological males out of female sports preserves the entire purpose of Title IX and protects women in athletics. Also, just yesterday, the notable ruling as well, allowing mail-in ballots to be counted after Election Day. No doubt we'll try and go further into these matters here on future crosstalks, but wanted to bring these notable rulings to your attention. And friends, all the more important, again, a reminder to be praying for our president, our nation, our justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, the appellate court justices, those who represent us, just as Scripture encourages us to do as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our nation is celebrating 250 years of independence. We have something in this nation like no other nation on earth. And while we have many within who despise our nation and are trying to change it, we recognize that people all over the world are seeking to come here, seeking to get in, come across the borders. And as we mark this very momentous anniversary, I'd like to remind you of the preamble for our Declaration of Independence and also the preamble to our Constitution. In 1776, 250 years ago, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is a right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And then some 11 years later, the preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. Friends, we have so much to be thankful for. Just look at that First Amendment alone, and to give God thanks for that. Today, we're going to focus on our nation, specifically the secret of America's greatness. Joining me in studio today, we welcome Randy Melcher, who is a college debate national champion. He did earn a master's degree in church history from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, graduated from the University of Wisconsin Law School, founded a Christian school in Milwaukee, leads tours of America's spiritual history, host Our Christian Heritage, which airs not only on WVCY television, but is available on demand also at vcy.tv. He started ChristianHeritage.info. It's a website that lets you find the nearest historical sites around you with just a click of the button, click of the mouse, including many guided videos by Dr. Erwin Lutzer. Randy's also a member of our VCY Board of Directors. And Randy, good to have you in studio today.
Glad to be with you today.
So, as I stated in your bio, you host a program, Our Christian Heritage, and that airs on vcy.tv. And you've planned many trips that focus on the Christian heritage of our nation. Tell us about that passion that you have for our Christian heritage.
Sure. It comes back to something that we all long for. One of the ways that Jesus talked was in stories, that there's parables, that these stories, with my young children, they always want to hear a story. And when you hear these stories of America's history, there's stories you can hear of our Christian heritage in other countries, but in America, when you especially can go back to the places in Washington, D.C., and you hear the stories of how the events that happened there. We think in recent times of those of the lawyers who fought, as we were talking about legal cases, when we could see Roe versus Wade overturned. We look back at places in New York City where George Washington was inaugurated as president, and they have his Bible right there on Wall Street. The stories in Massachusetts of Plymouth Plantation, as you can stand there on the banks and feel the cold and think about what our forefathers went through. Those stories really draw out from us an appreciation for what our forefathers have gone through.
Why do you think it's so important we remember these things?
Well, if we don't know where we've been, it's hard to tell where we're going. Today we look around and we realize, there's people who don't know, who don't appreciate. In fact, just saw a poll that only 14% of Democrats say that they're extremely proud to be an American. Mm-hmm. We see reports where people are afraid to fly the American flag, where they are ashamed of their country. But this isn't the case. We have so much to be grateful for. When we read through the Psalms, continually God was reminding the Israelites of all the blessings that they had been through. So it's a wonderful time, especially here as we're celebrating the quincentennial, half of 500, the 250th anniversary of America.
Yeah, it truly is amazing. And it's very disheartening to see the patriotism in decline. I mean, we have so much as a nation, so much to be thankful for. And, just the other day I was talking with Todd Nettleton on Voice of the Martyrs. We see the persecution that's happening of believers. And to know that we've got that free exercise of religion here in the United States and the right to assemble with one another, to come together as a body of believers in Christ, that's so very precious.
We were interviewing Virginia Perdone for Our Christian Heritage. She was a lawyer in Romania representing pastors. She said, I'm not from America. I am now an American citizen. But there is nowhere else in the world. Where do we go? Erwin Lutzer, he joined us. He overheard us interviewing. He said, can I come over? Now, I'm a Canadian, and this is the 250th anniversary of America. Yeah. And America is the greatest nation on earth. Mm-hmm. We have so much to be thankful for in our country.
Well, Randy, you've conducted research on what you call the secret of America's greatness and have gathered together some 17 documents in chronological order. And you speak to this matter, and what you've put together really gets to the heart of the matter. And give us just an overview, then we'll get down into some specifics here.
Sure. First off, recognizing, just the greatness of America spiritually, even just, I think, just in recent decades, the fact that we can go across the country. We're so blessed just even having Buc-ee's instead of some of the old roadside bathrooms that we've had. We've been blessed in so many ways. But the key issue as we look for what is the secret to it? Why is America so successful? The secret was we want to make sure, first off, that we were using documented, authentic primary sources. There's a great quote that's gone around where talks about how Alexis de Tocqueville went into the churches of America, heard her pulpits flame, that America's great because America's good, and if America ceases to be good, she'll cease to be great. The problem with that quote is we can't prove that Tocqueville said that. In fact, many people going back to the late 1800s repeated the quote, but in all of Tocqueville's writings, we don't have that quote. So there's great statements out there, but we want to make sure we're using actual documented quotes, because today, when we put stuff on the internet, there's people who will jump on you. Well, prove it, show us where that was. And so that's where, even though there's great sounding phrases, we wanted to find the documented phrases.
And in today's phraseology, it's you bring home the receipts.
Yes.
For this. And you've divided this into three sections. And the first section you have is the founding era. And you don't begin at the Declaration of Independence. Rather, you take us back 156 years earlier to the signing of the Mayflower Compact. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, if you go into the U.S. Capitol, and you look around in the giant rotunda, one of the first pictures they have there is the embarkation of the Pilgrims, which is one of the defining movements in American history. And as we look through and we say, why did they come here? Did they come here for gold? Did they come here to establish an empire? Did they come over to advance, the glory of the King of England? No. What do they write to us when they write the Mayflower Compact? And this is what's neat. This is some of the documented evidence, the receipts that we have, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. And that was that aspect of it, that this was signed by 41 of the passengers, November 21st, 1620, Princeton Harbor, Cape Cod, Mayflower. And the amazing thing we think about with the Pilgrims, normally we talk about a Thanksgiving. If you go over to Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts, you have an incredible historical park where you can see some of the settlements they lived on. But there's a poster in the gift shop there that really brings it home. There's a poster that has silhouettes of the passengers of the Mayflower, but half of them are grayed out. Half of them are black in a full shape. Half of those pilgrims who crossed America, who crossed the Atlantic Ocean to come to America, didn't survive that first winter. This was not a luxury cruise. Today, we have giant cruise ships that come in all the way to Milwaukee. In fact, one of the cruises goes from Antarctica to Milwaukee. They call it Longitude Cruise, and you can go and have a wonderful time. But no, our forefathers didn't take a luxury cruise. Half of them didn't survive that first winter. The imprivations, the sufferings that they endured, seeking religious freedom that we have as a privilege because of that document, that Mayflower Compact that goes back to 1620, that we have the first writings of American history.
And friends, again, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. Very important document, and that's the first one mentioned in the research here on the secret of America's greatness. Now, we're going to come up against a break, but we're going to go through in rapid fashion some of the other matters, the documents. Many of these are likely documents that you've never heard of before, and so Randy will be bringing these to light. He's done some research on these areas, and we'll be getting into them here today on the broadcast, and I trust it gives you a brand new appreciation for what we have as a nation, but more than just appreciation, you thank God and encourage yourself to look to Him for our source of guidance, even as the Pilgrims did. We'll be back in just 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation researcher with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how primitive was early man?
Chris, early man was never primitive in an evolutionary sense at all. In the beginning, man was created in the image of God with great ability, even able to communicate with God face to face. All this was before sin, however, and we've been deteriorating ever since. Evidence continues to accumulate that long ago man was highly sophisticated, evidently even performing brain surgery. Skulls have been found with holes drilled in them for surgical reasons, and the person had survived. No, Chris, there never were primitive humans. There were some with less technology and not much education, but Stone Age cultures exist today. This is a level of civilization, but not an evolutionary stage, and it's been that way ever since, back in Genesis.
For free information on creation, visit us on the web at www.icr.org.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. Randy Melchert, our guest today. We're talking about the secret of America's greatness and talking about a number of documents and sometimes letters, and to give us some, background information regarding those who found our nation and continued on the pathway toward keeping our eyes fixed on the Lord Jesus Christ. Randy, you take us to a letter next in your research that George Washington sent home to his brother. It was July 18th, 1755, written during the French and Indian War. Tell us about it.
Sure, and in fact, recently I was in Philadelphia and was a little bit east of the place, and we found the location of this battle. Now, there's different legends we hear in American history. Maybe you've heard of them, of the bulletproof George Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those legends, some of the talks about the Native American chiefs, we don't have the firsthand accounts of. So there's some debate among scholars that of some of the different aspects. But here's the part that we know absolutely for certain, is that on July 18th, George Washington, we have the letter, we can read it. He wrote to his brother, by the all-powerful dispensations of providence, capital P providence. What happened? I have been protected beyond all human probability and expectation, for I had 4 bullets through my coat, and 2 horses shot under me, yet escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side. During this battle in the French and Indian War, most of the British officers were killed. At this time, George Washington was on the British side. He was part of that group. And yet here it is, death's coming all around. 4 bullets through his coat, 2 horses shot out. And yet providence, capital P providence, spared his life. This is one of those secrets of American history that we have incredibly well documented.
Mm-hmm. George Washington, so instrumental here in our nation, in our founding and his service. There's also a man by the name of John Adams. He was the second president of the United States, and he's the third one that you mentioned, particularly with an entry in his diary.
Yes, this chronologically occurred 1756, 20 years before the Revolution. February 22nd, 1756. And this is what's so neat is people used to keep diaries where we don't have to wonder about what they thought. Sometimes some of our founding fathers who didn't keep diaries, they're not as famous because we don't always have their writings. But he would keep his diary. And he's sitting down and he's writing, suppose a nation in some distant region should take the Bible for their only law book. And every member should regulate his conduct by the precepts there exhibited. Every member would be obliged in conscience to temperance and frugality and industry, to justice and kindness and charity towards his fellow man, to piety and love and reverence toward Almighty God. In this commonwealth, no man would impair his health by gluttony, drunkenness, or lust. No man would sacrifice his precious time to cards or any other trifling and mean amusement. No man would steal or lie or any way defraud his neighbor, but would live in peace and goodwill with all men. No man would blaspheme his maker or profane his worship, but a rational and manly, a sincere and unaffected piety and devotion would reign in all hearts. What a utopia, what a paradise would this region be. This was one of our founding fathers as he's musing on what would make a nation that would see the blessings of heaven, a nation built on the Bible.
Yeah, take the Bible for their only law book. And yet we continue to hear separation of church and state today.
Oh, Christian nationalism. I remember talking to somebody just downtown here. There was an event, and they said, well, I don't think we should mix government and religion. I was like, well, I don't know about you, but I kind of wish that our lawmakers wouldn't lie to us, that they wouldn't steal from us. You know, I hope they'd kind of keep their marriage vows, too. I don't think that's a bad thing. She admitted, you might be right on that.
Yeah. Well, as we continue in the founding era, you take us to a place called Meditation Rock. I'm guessing many people who never heard of Meditation Rock. Tell us about it.
No, this is a rock, Fredericksburg, Virginia. In fact, they used to have postcards about it. I was on eBay and found a postcard of this place. Meditation Rock, Mary Washington's favorite spot. Now, we've all heard of George Washington, but very few of us have heard of Mary because Mary was his mother. And so Meditation Rock, there's historical marker. It's been protected well. And there's a note here on the back of this postcard. Beautiful postcard, has a nice little sunset scene. But it says here, Mary Bell Washington prayed for the safety of her son and country during the dark days of the Revolution. There's on the historical marker, it talks about the National Mary Washington Memorial Association, that they raised funds to build a monument. You know what they realized? This was back 1960s. They realized, hey, wait a minute, we're losing our history. We need to record this place. This place was special because George Washington's mother came here almost every day to pray for her son. How did those dark times of Valley Forge, how did America survive? Well, George Washington had a praying mother.
Yeah. Wow, what a challenge for moms today.
Exactly. I mean, that opportunity of, you know what? Mary couldn't go out and fight. She couldn't take on the British Empire, but she could pray.
Yeah.
And today, there's a historical marker because of a praying mother who prayed for her son. Maybe that's why Providence spared his life. You know, maybe there was some impact that praying mother, that when you have 4 bullet holes through your coat, but that George Washington survived.
Yeah.
Because of that praying mother.
You know, it's also amazing as we go through the armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6, we see that power of prayer that comes through as well. It's not a battle of flesh and blood, but prayer, the work of God, very much at work as well.
It is.
Well, next is what's called Washington's Circular Letter. Tell us about it.
Sure. So Revolutionary War comes, it finishes miraculously. The United States of America defeats the largest empire. And then George Washington does something unprecedented. The King of England said that he must be the greatest man in the world, because when this battle was all over, he didn't become King, His Excellency King George I of America. He resigned. And kings didn't do that. Here it is, he resigns. But what does he do? He writes a letter to the peoples of the United States. A circular letter, it's called. In fact, at Washington's grave, we've been there with groups. We've been able to lay a wreath. And when you're doing that, they read as a prayer from his circular letter, what was his prayer for the nation? He says, I now make it my earnest prayer that God would have you to do justice, to love mercy, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion. And without a humble imitation of whose example of these things, we can never hope to be a happy nation. So those phrases, do justice, love mercy, and then he talks about humble imitation. Those 3 aspects, Washington didn't, sometimes he would quote scripture directly. Other times he would kind of meditate on it. And this is Micah 6:8. What did we told Micah 6:8? Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. You know what? That was Washington's prayer when he's resigning, when everyone from the country is looking at him. What are we going to do now? What has he called America to do? But to do justice, to love mercy, and humbly imitate him. And he said, that's how we can have a happy nation.
Randy Melcher with us today. We're talking about the secret of America's greatness. And friends, there's so much to, again, thank the Lord for as we, again, approach this 250th anniversary of our nation. And just reviewing documented research. And friends, we'll be sharing with you a website here momentarily as well. Be ready to write it down where you can actually access this information and click on a link to take you to that source document as well. But next on the list is an address from Benjamin Franklin. Tell us about that address.
Sure. So it's 1787, all right? Washington resigns. The Article of Confederation was struggling. America's all the different states, they were struggling to form a nation because Massachusetts would do one thing, Virginia would another. Then all of a sudden they decide, we need a new form of government. We need a constitution. But there was bickering, there was disputes, there was arguments. Now, Benjamin Franklin, if you hear the secular news, they say he was an agnostic, he was a deist, that he was one of the, he was, he was not probably the model of virtue. Maybe you've seen the recent movie of The Great Awakening. However, he had a great friend named George Whitefield, and Whitefield had an impact on him. Now, there's different things that we could say, well, what did he really think inside? We don't know what he really thought in his heart, but we know from his journals, and we actually have in his handwriting what he wrote and what he gave as a speech to the Constitutional Convention. You see, it was deadlocked, and it's in hot days like the summer we're in today, arguments, tempers flared. And so then Benjamin Franklin stands up, and he says, and this is what's amazing, we have this in his handwriting, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can raise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed this political building no better than the builders of Babel.
Wow.
This was Ben Franklin, one of the least religious. You know, we hear from Bill Feder and everything. They'll tell you about the ministers that were part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And many would say that, yeah, Ben Franklin was probably the least devout. So if this is the least devout man in that constitutional convention, you know, you wonder what the others there would have said as well. But just this reminder, except the Lord build the house. And this was the focusing that Ben Franklin realized we needed to have at that constitutional convention.
Yeah, and friends, a lot of back and forth at that convention, but gave us the very Constitution that we have, sent out then to the states for ratification. And that is not 1776, but we're looking 11 years after that time frame. Let's also take a look here. This is followed by a letter from George Washington to a Hebrew congregation as well. And in this as well, there's also kind of a correlation to another passage from Micah.
There is. Daniel Dreisbach, he's a professor. We've actually had him come to one of our tours of D.C. He met with us. He's a professor there, wrote the book Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers, published by Oxford University Press, all right? I mean, fairly prestigious group. So he was talking about how the Founding Fathers used so much of the Bible in their writings that oftentimes when things would get published in Europe, they'd had to include footnotes. George Washington wrote many different letters, and so all of a sudden the Hebrew congregation was asking him, well, we're a religious minority. Will we be tolerated in this country, or will we be expelled? The Jews had been expelled from Spain in 1492. George Washington writes, may the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while every one shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. Now, this phrase may not be familiar to you. However, this phrase is used several times in the Bible. This was actually one of George Washington's favorite phrases. When we look at Micah 4:4, there was a promise there that Micah was looking forward to the land. What is the land that God blesses? What does it look like when we obey him and we see his blessing? But they shall sit, every man, under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. That idea of private property, every man his vine, his fig tree, freedom, freedom from fear, freedom that your country is secure, that your government is protecting the rights, that there is no need to be afraid of foreign invasion, that we can enjoy the fruits of the labors. Ecclesiastes, where it talks about enjoying those labors. And George Washington, this was one of his favorite phrases to quote from the Bible. The fluency that he had of pulling phrases that, I mean, this wasn't John 3:16. We'd consider this today a relatively obscure portion of the Old Testament. But this was George Washington's, one of his favorite phrases that he would often use, quoting the Bible, seeking those blessings that God would have.
Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. We're talking about the secret of America's greatness, and Randy Melchert has put together a lot of research in this regard, and kind of working through this research to get to that secret, what has made this nation great. And Randy, we're going to get to Patrick Henry in just a moment, but you've actually put this up on a website to give our listeners access to it.
We do, secretofamerica.com. You know, when you're looking for some of the stuff, perhaps, hey, it's July 4th is coming. Maybe if you're a pastor, or if you're a pastor listening, you're looking for a quote for 4th of July. These are the documented sources that you can see the original sources. Secretofamerica.com.
And friends, we'll be back in just 1 minute and continue on our journey through the secret of America's greatness. This is Crosstalk coming your way from VCY America. Back in a minute.
Kristen Rosa is propped up on pillows in a hospital maternity ward. Nearly 9 months pregnant and about to give birth to twins, and knows one of them likely won't survive. She and her husband have been advised to reduce, to terminate, to abort the tiny boy inside her. But the Rosas have decided to fight for their son's life. The last several months had felt like a roller coaster ride, and now they're waiting for that inevitable plunge that they have no way of stopping. But they trust that God is with them as they cling tightly to their faith and to each other. The book, Saving Nate, tells the true story of a devastating prenatal diagnosis And even though counseled to abort, they chose life and trusted the Lord with the outcome. Saving Nate, available for a donation of $16 to VCY America. Call 1-800-729-9829.
Celebrating 250 years as a nation. Friends, so much to be thankful for. Here in the United States of America, there are many who do a lot of trash talking regarding our nation itself. Oh, we don't agree with every decision. Some of you are applauding Supreme Court decisions. Some of you are certainly speaking in opposition to them. There's a variety of back and forth here. When you look at our nation as a whole, again, we have so much to be thankful for. And we're looking at so many of these founding documents and founding eras. Sometimes it came as a diary entry or a letter that was submitted as well. And we're kind of working through this in The Secret of America's Greatness. And friends, you can find all these listed along with hot links to take you right to the documents that we're speaking of at secretofamerica.com. secretofamerica.com. Write that down, check it out, and kind of work through these various letters and statements that were being made. Randy, Patrick Henry is next on your list, and first of all, speak to that famous statement that he made that so many are familiar with, but he also, to find something that people will not be familiar with, something that he wrote in his last will and testament.
Sure. Most people, when they think of Patrick Henry, they think of give me liberty or give me death.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is we don't know that he actually said that. The challenge we have is that now I've been there to St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia. I've sat in there where on March 23rd, 1775, the Virginia Second Virginia Convention occurred. We know the place, we know the date, we know the speaker. However, we're not sure exactly what was said. The problem was that over 40 years after he delivered the speech, 18 years after he died, his biographer published a posthumous reconstruction of the speech. The problem was his speech was so powerful, nobody bothered to write it down. They were so in awe of it. The version we have came about from people as they asked him, well, is this something he would have said? They tried to kind of piece together. The speech we're most familiar with is a reconstruction. By the way, this was how powerful it was when he gave it. Edmund Randolph, future governor of Virginia, said the convention sat in silence for several minutes. This was a loquacious group. They didn't sit in silence. It drove them to silence. George Mason, he wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He said the audience lost control of their passions. Thomas Marshall told his son John Marshall, later Chief Justice, the speech was one of the boldest, vehement, animated pieces of eloquence that had ever been delivered. Edward Carrington, he was listening by a window. He was so affected, he asked to be buried there at the site of this church.
Wow.
This was a powerful speech. By the way, Thomas Jefferson said the greatest orator he had ever heard was Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry's pastor, by the way, went on to, his mother would actually take him to the Presbyterian church growing up. His dad was an Anglican pastor. Patrick Henry's pastor was Samuel Davies. When Jonathan Edwards passed away, the next president of Princeton was Samuel Davies. Patrick Henry came from a really great group of orators. But here it is, the one thing that we know, that again, in his handwriting, was his last will and testament. So what did Patrick Henry say? He said, all the inheritance I can give to my dear family, the religion of Christ can give them one which will make them rich indeed. He writes, I have now disposed of all my property for my family. There's one thing more I wish I could give them, and that is the Christian religion. If they had this and I had not given them 1 shilling, they would be rich. And if they have not that, and had I given them all the world, they would be poor.
Wow.
This is Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia, one of the leading voices for the Revolution, one of the leading voices in the debates on the Constitution, the man who helped supply George Washington during Valley Forge. This was what he wanted to be known for. And this was his last will and testament.
And friends, you'll find the link on that site, secretofamerica.com. And the next segment is The Secret of America's Greatness is a Republic Tested. And you focus on the years of 1825 to 1865. And you include first from the inaugural address from John Quincy Adams.
The last of the founding fathers. He was just a boy during the time of the Revolution. Here it is, 1825. He's becoming inaugurated. And what does he quote? He says, knowing that except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. with fervent supplications for his favor. To his overruling providence, I commit with humble but fearless confidence my own fate and the future destinies of my country. This March 4th, 1825, this was one of the last of the Founding Fathers, just a year before the first celebration of the 50th anniversary, the famous occasion when we think back July 4th when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both passed away that same day. What did the last of the Founding Fathers say when he ascended to the office? Quoting again that verse, except the Lord keep the city. The watchman waketh but in vain.
Wow. Randy, you then take us to the personal diary of James K. Polk, who served as the 11th President of the United States.
Now, James K. Polk is one of the least known of the Founding Fathers. He's buried actually in Nashville, Tennessee. If you go to christianheritage.info, you can see a video we did at the location at his grave. He's one of the more interesting. Many historians consider him one of the hardest working presidents in American history. Working on the northern border with Canada, the southern border with Mexico. He served for only one term. At the end of his term, he died less than 30 days later. While he was in office, he kept a diary, and it was quite an interesting diary. You see, he grew up, he loved to go to church. By the way, the K in James K. Polk stands for Knox. His mother was a direct descendant of Knox. His father was an atheist, but he loved to discuss with preachers, with revivalists. But he wouldn't go for it himself. In fact, one day, it was his 50th birthday. He goes to the Methodist Church today, went with his private secretary. His wife was sick, so he goes by himself. He says the text was Acts 17:31, because he hath appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained. He said it was Communion Day. The sermon was solemn and forcible. It awakened the reflection that I had lived 50 years, and that before 50 years more, before we would turn 100, I would be sleeping with the generations which had gone before me. I thought of the vanity of this world's honors, how little they would profit me half a century hence, and that it was time for me to be putting my house in order. This is what he wrote, Sunday, November 2nd, 1845, on his 50th birthday. Now, the sad part is you know what? He realized he needed to do something, but he was busy. He was one of the hardest working presidents we had. And it wasn't until after he left office, in fact, the day before he died. Now, this is the other neat thing that we have. This isn't just a legend we have centuries later. This is from the newspaper accounts. The New York Daily Herald reported it less than 2 weeks after he passed, okay? So this is a very contemporaneous account. What did James K. Polk do the day before he died? He realized he was in trouble. He calls for a pastor. He says, "Sir, if I had suspected 20 years ago that I should come to my deathbed unprepared, it would have made me a wretched man. Yet I am about to die and have not made preparation. I have not even been baptized. Tell me, sir, can there be any ground for a man thus situated to hope?" You know what? The minister talked to him, and he realized, James K. Polk said, "I go forward in the name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, whom I hope and believe has pardoned all my sins and washed me from all my iniquities." You know, I look at James K. Polk kind of like Donald Trump. President Trump has talked to so many pastors. You know, you see some of the statements he makes, and you say, you know what? I don't think it's clicked yet. You know what? James K. Polk, the day before he died, he cut it close, but the day before he died, he finally accepted Jesus as a Savior.
Praise the Lord. Friends, you'll find the documentation and links for that, secretofamerica.com. Randy, you tell us then about Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, in which you direct us to his second inaugural address.
Which is a sermon. You could call it an address, but this is a sermon, especially compared to the first inaugural. There was a change. Gettysburg, the death of his son. We were just at the Lincoln Presidential Museum in Springfield, Illinois. You can read this on the walls of the Lincoln Memorial. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God. Each invokes his aid against the other. But what does he say? Let us judge not that we not be judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully in the Civil War he's talking about. The Almighty has his own purposes. You know, this was when he would write. He would say that woe to the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offenses cometh. Because what he's talking about, that Civil War was God's judgment on America. He said, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago. So still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether.
Well,
At this stage of the Civil War, Lincoln realized God was judging America. We need to submit to it. We think of brother shedding the blood of brother. More men were killed in the Civil War. More American lives were lost in that than almost all the other wars put together. He realized this was not just bad luck. This was God's judgment, and that he saw this as an opportunity that we need to call out to God.
Well, the third section of The Secret of America's Greatness is called The American Century, and that takes us from the years 1921 to the year 2001. And the first you include something by the 29th President of the United States, Warren G. Harding.
Now, this was kind of interesting. He's not a president we think of, and that's what was kind of neat, was just pulling out, let's look at President Harding, 1921. What did he say in his opening address? He says, I have taken the solemn oath of office on that passage of Holy Writ, wherein it is asked, what doth the Lord require of thee, but, as we read earlier, to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. This I plight to God and country.
Wow.
Warren Harding saw this as his oath of office, was to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with his God.
You also mentioned a stamp issued by the U.S. Postal Service for Apollo 8.
Apollo 8, December 24th, 1968. Now, this was not a statement made on American soil. This statement was made 240,000 miles from Earth.
And tell you what, we're just a couple minutes from break, but I think we have time to get this in. This is a statement that came from Apollo 8.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
That coming from Space Communications, Randy, from Apollo 8.
And one of those voices was James Lovell Jr. If you're from Milwaukee, there's a James Lovell Street in honor of that astronaut who knew the secret of America's greatness.
And we'll come back with more right after the break. We've got more to tell you, friends. Secretofamerica.com is the website. We'll be back in 1 minute.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brennan House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. I'm in Daniel chapter 6. The leaders and administrators around King Darius, they were jealous of Daniel. He was about to be promoted and be very high in the kingdom and over many of these men. And they sought to take him out, literally to have him killed. And what did they say? You remember this Jew from Judah, the captive? This Jew from Judah? You remember that king? Of course the king knew that. They didn't have to add in the part about him being Jewish. That was anti-Semitism. Isn't it interesting and sad when faithfulness to God is called disloyalty to the state? Is that happening in America today? Faithfulness to God is called disloyalty to the state. Sadly, it's becoming popular in America First, which is really now becoming cover for anti-Semitism. If you believe in God's plan for the Jewish people, you're now no longer America First because you stand for God and His Word. I'm Brennan House.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America as we approach our 250th anniversary of a nation, the secret of America's greatness. With us today is Randy Melchert, who has done a lot of research. He, as a matter of fact, he hosts a TV program, Our Christian Heritage, which you'll find on demand at vcy.tv. That's vcy.tv. Also, christianheritage.info. christianheritage.info. You'll find lots of great information there, and this information we're talking about today at secretofamerica.com, secretofamerica.com, and just talking about the secret of America's greatness. We were just talking about Apollo 8. We played that transmission from space, and the U.S. Postal Service actually put out a stamp with Apollo 8. It was a 6-cent stamp at that time, and have those words, "In the beginning, God." Randy, I'm guessing that as we talk about the next matter in the book or in the research that you conducted, we're going to advance to the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. And while there are many who are familiar with him as president, I'm guessing that the majority of people are not familiar with the letter that he actually wrote to his father-in-law. Tell us about it.
No, very few people are familiar with this. That's why we have a poster set. We've displayed earlier in South Dakota, South Carolina, different events. This letter I try to blow up to full size. It's about 4 pages because it's an amazing letter to read. In fact, this was not even part of the presidential records at the Reagan Library. The author of a columnist in the Washington Post, of all places, and that's why I like when we can go to a source like the Washington Post, we're not going to expect it to have much about America's Christian heritage. Well, Karen Tumulty wrote that she was going through a cardboard box of Nancy Reagan's personal effects from the Reagan Library. She was doing research on a biography of Nancy Reagan. She quotes this letter with permission of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute that allowed the Washington Post to reprint it. This is one of the most amazing letters you'll read. He starts out talking to Loyal. He's writing this letter to Loyal Davis, his father-in-law. His father-in-law was a doctor, was an atheist. And Reagan says, "I hope you'll forgive me for this, but I've been wanting to write you. I'm aware of the strain you're under, and I believe with all my heart there's help for that. First, I want to tell you of a personal experience I've kept to myself. I was governor. The problems were endless, unsolvable. He found himself with an ulcer. He said, in Warner Brothers, I'd never gotten an ulcer. I was doing Maalox, but I had constant pain. This went on for months. I had Maalox and was reaching for it all the time. Then one day, I was healed. I didn't need the Maalox anymore. I knew something was different. The mail comes in. First lady was from a stranger in the southern part of the state. She went to tell me she was part of a group that met every day to pray for me. Second letter was from a man, a stranger at the other end of the state. He was part of the group that met weekly to pray for me. He says, within the hour, a young fellow from legal came into my office. Governor, I think you'd like to know some of us on the staff come in early every morning and get together to pray for you. Coincidence? I think not. Went to the doctor, and the doctor said, not only do you not have an ulcer, there's no indication you ever had one. Reagan wrote, there's a line in the Bible, wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name, there will I be also. He says, hey, Loyal, I know your doubt, but could I impose on you? Some 700 years before the birth of Christ, the ancient Jewish prophets predicted the coming of a Messiah. They said he'd be born in a lowly place, would proclaim himself the Son of God, would be put to death for saying that. All in all, there were a total of 123 specific prophecies about his life, all of which came true. Now, this is a miracle. He says, but Loyal, I don't think that's as big of a miracle as the history of his life. Either he was who he said he was, or he was the greatest faker and charlatan who ever lived. But would a liar and faker suffer the death he did when all he had to do was just admit he'd been lying and he'd be free? A man of 30 years, without credentials as a scholar or a priest, began preaching on street corners, owned nothing but the clothes on his back, didn't travel beyond a circle less than 100 miles across, did this for only 3 years, and was executed as a common criminal. But for 2,000 years, he has had more impact on the world than all the teachers, scientists, emperors, generals, and admirals who ever lived, all put together. Reagan writes in his own hand, the Apostle John said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. Reagan wrote, all we have to do is ask God in Jesus' name to help. We only have to trust and have faith in his infinite goodness and mercy. He says, we've been promised that this is only a part of life, a greater glory awaits us. It awaits you together one day. All that's required is that you believe. Tell God you put yourself in his hands.
Wow.
Love, Ronnie.
Wow. Friend, you've got a link to this letter on this website, correct?
Yes, we do.
secretofamerica.com. And friends, what a powerful letter. What a powerful letter from Ronald Reagan to his dying father-in-law. We only have 2 minutes left. You talk about the last call from Flight 93 as well.
I was over in Pennsylvania. We're here at the Flight 93 Museum, where the men and women of that plane, civilians on a plane, joined together to stop Muslim terrorists. They're saved the lives. You could read about the 2 Air Force pilots that got called up to duty. They didn't know where the plane was. They didn't have any missiles. The only way they could have taken down Flight 93 was a suicide mission to ram it. But they didn't know where it was. The transponder was turned off. They weren't sure they could do it in time before. Who knows how many lives would have been lost. And yet, on that plane, there was a call from Todd Beamer that he's trying to call his wife, tell his wife I love her. He couldn't get a hold of his wife. The circuits were jammed in New York. He's talking to the phone operator, Elisa Jefferson, who's been on Crosstalk before.
Yeah.
And he's praying the Lord's Prayer with Lisa, our Father, which art in heaven. You know, he's Lisa recounted, Todd called out, you know what? Jesus help me. A few of us passengers are getting together. I think we're going to jump the guy with the bomb. Lisa's like, are you sure that's what you want to do? She's not a 911 operator. She's a phone tech. And here it is. She's talking with somebody on Flight 93. She says, yes. Todd says, yes, I'm going to have to go out on faith because at this point, I don't have much of a choice. She hears, are you ready? Let's roll.
Yeah.
This was Todd Beamer, Christian college graduate, a man of faith who's raising his family, had a couple of young children. And yet when the time came that terrorism came to his country, Todd Beamer prayed and said, let's roll.
Amen.
This is the secret of America's greatness.
Randy, you close off your research with 3 Bible verses.
Yes, those Bible verses that we read. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Proverbs 29:2. Proverbs 14:34, the righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And then finally, as we often read in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
Wow. The secret of America's greatness. Randy, thank you for the research, and thank you for coming in and sharing that with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the privilege.
And friends, delve into this information, and you'll find the links to these sources. Read that Reagan letter. It's powerful. secretofamerica.com. secretofamerica.com. And friends, a reminder to be praying for those who are in authority, that we might lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.